As The Shy extends into its sixth season, it continues to be something worth applauding for how diverse it wants its depiction of Chicago to be. However, it still struggles to do that at a high caliber, at a consistent basis, even with the talent that it has. So to summarize the season, Duda finds himself in a position where he has to remind people that he's one of the baddest men in the city. And he finds more and more pushback as he becomes more and more audacious. For whether it's Emmett and Rob trying to kill him, which he has not forgotten about, Rob's mother Alicia coming about, then there's of course Victor, who's deciding to push back about him doing stuff for or with Duda, and even his own soldiers starting to kind of push back, rebel, or question things. It seems that Duda throughout the whole season has to try to course correct his empire before he ends up being the fallen king. So getting to the review section, the first highlight for us is just when it comes to Papa, of pretty much any of the OG characters, he's the only one who has a storyline that is not only consistent but also interesting. For in the first half of the season, he loses his father. The second half of the season, he starts following Pastor Ezekiel, who his father always warned him about, and with that, you kind of have to question, has Papa been to the apple, or is he just trying to learn all the ways that one could be a pastor, monetize it, yet at the same time still help one's flock? It's hard to say if Papa's gone to the dark side or not, or if he's just learning how the dark side operates, but it's one of the few interesting storylines here, especially in terms of character growth, that can really hook you on and want to keep you attentive to what's going to happen next. As for other storylines or situations that we thought were highlights, being introduced to Fatima's chosen family was a positive thing, especially since when it comes to The Shy, it's always tried to make sure that the LGBTQI community exists in the form of more than just one character. But even with that said, I would say when it comes to Isis and Aaron, they're introduced. We don't really get to know them. We don't see them a lot, but at the same time, it is a beautiful thing to see that they exist, that when it comes to Shad, Victor, and others, they're welcome as long as they come correct. And them being trans people isn't the beginning and end of their stories. They have lives, relationships that we don't see on screen, but at the same time, at least it's established that even if we don't see it, it still exists because they have a whole life outside of what happens when the camera's focused on them. Coming up next would be Gemma and Tierra's relationship, and to be honest, I kind of expected Tierra to kind of be one of those characters who, like a lot of them on The Shy, stuck around because The Shy has a budget, not because they really have something to do with this character that's meaningful. But when it comes to Gemma and Tierra, because Gemma didn't grow up with her mom, Tierra kind of steps into that role, if not a big sister figure, and with all that's going on with Gemma when it comes to Jake, Maisha, and this new client she has named Brittany, Tierra being there for her, not trying to tell her what to do but guide her in some ways, it created a lot of sweet moments. And when it comes to The Shy, there's not a lot of sweet moments when it comes to situations and moments that don't involve a male character, so to get that with these two felt very special. Though, with that said, I would be remiss to not mention Nina and Keisha's therapy scene in episode 7, especially because it wasn't just an intimate moment between the two, but also it allowed Nina to open up in ways that I don't think she often gets to on this show. She, like Jada and most of the mothers, often feel very stuck into that bubble of who they are, and when they're around each other, sometimes they do get to break out and, remind us that they have lives outside their children, but more often than not, they feel very regulated to being someone's parent. But in that moment when Nina was talking about how she didn't really want to be a mother, she just kind of got put onto a track that she never really got off on, it was something different, because you don't really get a lot of those conversations, especially unless the character's this mean, nasty person, whereas a woman talks about she didn't really want kids, but she had them because that's just what you did. And granted, Keisha's reaction to that was definitely not something happy, but it made it so when it comes to Nina, She wasn't just this character who kind of seems whiny all the time and is always woe is me, but you got a sense of why things are so difficult for her when it comes to raising Kevin and also Keisha and probably life in general. The last highlight for us is Nuck as a father, and that's because, as mentioned, there are a lot of characters on this show who feel like they should either be cut, made to reoccurring characters, or just, pop in every now and then, sort of like Dom does for some reason. Yet, unfortunately, there's still a lot of characters who just show up in scenes, maybe say a few words, but they have no real impact on the show. Nuck was one of those people, but in the second half of the season, as he learned that he was a father to Keisha's kid, he stepped up a bit. He got involved into Emmett's storyline, which is pretty much the main storyline of the show, and with that, they started to really invest in him in a way that made him meaningful, so that him being in the background all this time was so they eventually could step up, rather than, again, the Shy just having a budget to keep all these people, add new people, and it not hurting nobody, so they decide not to cut nobody, because how many opportunities do black actors, brown actors, whatever you want to say, really get a check consistently like this? But I will say, though, considering how this season ends and the position Nuck gets into, that's going to be the real test of whether or not they kept him for a good reason, or if everything's about to fall flat in the next season. Which leads us to the low point, and that's that when it comes to Pastor Jackson's death, when it also comes to Duda's death, full on spoiler, they just didn't feel impactful. I mean, I would even add in when it comes to Kevin leaving the show, it just didn't hit like it should have hit. Zay killing Pastor Jackson the way he did might have been brutal, but it also felt like everyone moved on a little bit too quickly. And then when it comes to Duda's death, he's been the big villain for most of this show, yet this is how you do him? Shot in the back of the head. Then you have that be what introduces the police back to the show. And granted, maybe Detective Toussaint and all them might bring something to the show to help kind of pep it back up again, but you just killed the big bad in such a quick and easy way. And worst off, they start the episode questioning who did it, and by the time the episode ends, you find out who did it within 50 some odd minutes, and that's with all these other storylines going on. It just feels like such a disservice to his character to write him off in such a way. I mean, even when it came to Ronnie getting written off a couple of seasons ago, it felt like something impactful. This felt like, one of the rare times the show realized something had to be done because otherwise it's going to become stale. But with that said, this show still feels way too bloated. Like, it's wonderful to see actors like Leon and Kadeem Hardison show up, but you don't give them something besides a check for a couple of episodes. That's all that it really feels like they do here. And then you have it where characters like Dre get written off, which is not great because it's just abrupt, but then you put 2 or 3 new characters in there, and a part of me wants to look at it as maybe like in the case of Nuck, a lot of people, or characters rather, there's long-term plans for them that just can't pan out right here and right now, and they can't even hint to it because there's so much going on. But it just doesn't feel sustainable the way this show handles trying to juggle all these characters and have all of their storylines be touched upon damn near every episode. It's just not working. It's really making it so that you can tell which characters matters, which characters don't. Some people get storylines that actually are compelling, other ones that just rely on shock value, and it seems the challenge of trying to keep all these actors employed and their characters interesting is just not working out. To add on to those issues for the second undefense topic is just how a lot of storylines get wrapped up or just plain forgotten. Again, Dre being suddenly gone was a little bit mind-boggling. But on top of that, there's Victor's murder case and how that gets handled, Maisha giving up on music, Keisha stopping to look for work because, Emmett got everything. And a lot of the times it just feels like the writers are realizing that something is not working, so they just decide to quickly resolve it. Or else it's like, hey, this person is starting to have too much of a storyline that could potentially take away or stray away from everything that's going on with Emmett, what's going on with the main storyline over here. So we got to cut that shit out. And then boop, they figure out a resolution and then quickly move on. And it's one of those things that kind of help you understand why a lot of shows don't make it this far, because after some point, the little things that kind of bugged you early on, but you like the show, so you just kind of set it aside. Now that you see that it's not something they're going to change or going to fix, it's just part of the show's culture, it makes it harder to really stay a committed fan. Now, when it comes to the written review of this, there are a few more topics, but we're just going to slim this down because just thinking about what the show does sometimes it's going to be frustrated. So the next on the fence topic is bringing back the police, and the reason why that's on the fence topic is because a lot of stuff on this show feels like stuff that they're not sure about. It's kind of going off of the last topic about storylines, like how they get wrapped up or else forgotten. Sometimes the show also starts things and then decides it doesn't work and they just drop it all together. The police, how the show handles politics, is those two things that it seems the writers feel like because of Chicago, and Chicago's known for these two things, it should be incorporated into the show, but at the same time they don't know how to address it considering all else they have going on. So seemingly, rightfully so, by the end of season 2, the police were dropped and the show has been so much better without it. In terms of the politics, they dabbled in it when they had Duda become mayor, but then they dropped it. They kind of dabbled in it again with having Victor become a councilman, but it seemingly again they dropped it. And it just seems to me like, even though Detective Tucson is back, and we kind of dug what the character was doing back in the day, I hope if they're going to do this experiment one more time, either they do it right or they just officially acknowledge that nobody on our team knows how to write with these type of characters or this type of context or these type of situations, so it's just not going to be something we do. And maybe that's what this show needs to learn, that it can't do everything just because it doesn't have any peers in this field. Sometimes you got to leave room, space for someone else to do it and just focus on what you're actually good at, which leaves 2 more topics, but we're going to combine them because, again, this show is frustrating the hell out of me. And the 2 last topics are going to be Alicia and Brittany, and for both characters, the issue is wasted potential. For Brittany, less so because she's related to Bakari as a sister, and she ends up working with Duda, and her storyline, it was much better when she was kind of pushing Gemma to question her sexuality and everything, be competition for Maisha to kind of make her step her game up. But then once she got involved in the whole Duda thing, it kind of went downhill fast. As for Alicia, the main problem is Lynn Whitfield's performance was far better than her character was written. Lynn Whitfield made Alicia seem like a badass, but at the same time, the way that this show was written, they undercut Alicia almost every chance they got. They had her ex-husband get killed. They had Shad get attached to her as a head of her security, which allowed for a bunch of BS to happen in terms of Emmett's family getting attacked. It allowed for Rob to get killed. It's just, she was supposed to be Duda's equal. At least it was told that she was Duda's equal, potential success in terms of taking over the criminal empire. But they never really allowed her to be a badass. They allowed her to look like a badass, to look formidable, but when the time came for her to really show up and show out, she ain't do it. She always had money to give away to Emmett, to Rob and Tiff for whatever, but in terms of like really being about that action, she might have been there to potentially kill Duda, kind of redeem herself after all this nonsense, but then Nuck sneaks in, even though Shad's there, and he takes the win and could have killed her and him at the same time in the moment. So it's just like, I'm glad that they're keeping her around, but if you're going to continue to misuse her like this, she might be another actor that you need to just give away so that they can move on to hopefully bigger or better things. Overall, when it comes to The Chi, I feel like a part of me has recognized, because there's such a scarcity of dramas starring predominantly black casts, especially on platforms that give the show a budget, both in terms of marketing and production, you have to acknowledge that The Chi has a special place, which is why it seemingly wants to keep all these actors employed, bring in all these legendary actors to make sure that they can keep their SAG card and insurance. But it feels like we're at that point where this show has potentially lost what it's supposed to be about besides Chicago, and because it's so bloated with so many characters that it doesn't know how to handle properly, it's going downhill. Now, I won't say it's going downhill fast because, as noted, there are still special moments in it. Papa's doing fine as a character. Tierra and Gemma had special moments. Keisha had a good moment with her mother, but when you just look at all the characters, I would say outside of Papa, nobody really had that good, consistent storyline. And I don't see how a show like this can survive purely on name recognition alone.